The unexpected challenge. Jack stood in the middle of an alien arena, the sun blazing down from an unfamiliar sky. The ground beneath his feet was hard, made of some kind of metal that hummed with energy. Around him, a sea of alien spectators cheered, their voices a strange mix of clicks and growls. The air smelled of something pungent, almost metallic, and the oppressive weight of it made Jack feel like he was suffocating. He didn't belong here. He was just a chef, a simple cook from Earth who loved nothing more than creating delicious meals for his friends and family. Yet somehow fate had led him to this moment. The lights above flickered, signaling that the duel was about to begin. Jack's heart raced in his chest. His palms were sweaty. His thoughts were spinning. How had he ended up here? Why was he chosen for this challenge? These were questions he had no answers to. One minute, he was preparing a steak for a customer in a small restaurant, and the next, he was transported across the stars, standing before an alien empire, challenged to face one of their greatest warriors. "Prepare yourself, Earthling," a booming voice echoed from above. "You are about to face the greatest Swordmaster in the galaxy." Jack's eyes widened. The words hit him like a punch. Swordmaster? Jack wasn't a fighter. He was just a chef. He had never held a sword in his life, let alone fought someone who had spent years mastering the art of combat. The voice continued, "Your opponent, Zorath, is a legend. He has defeated countless beings in battle, and now you will face him in a fight to the death." Jack's legs felt weak. He wanted to run, to escape, but there was no way out. The alien soldiers had made it clear that he couldn't refuse. His only option was to fight. He wasn't sure what they would do if he didn't. A figure stepped forward from the shadows at the far end of the arena, his silhouette tall and imposing. Zorath, the Swordmaster. Jack couldn't see his face, but he could feel the coldness of the warrior's gaze. The Swordmaster's armor glinted in the sunlight, and the sword he carried looked more like a giant piece of jagged metal than a weapon. It was clear that Zorath was no ordinary warrior. He moved with the grace and confidence of someone who had seen countless battles, each victory building his reputation. Jack swallowed hard. How could he fight this monster? He was just a man with no training, no weapons. All he had was his knowledge of the kitchen, the skills he had spent years developing to cook perfect dishes. He wasn't sure how, but maybe, just maybe, those skills could help him survive. Zorath raised his sword, the blade shimmering in the light, and let out a roar that sent chills down Jack's spine. The crowd went wild, their alien voices rising in excitement. The fight was about to begin. Jack's mind raced. He tried to think, to come up with a plan, but nothing came to him. How could a chef stand against a legendary warrior? His entire life had been spent in kitchens, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, and creating perfect dishes. None of that had anything to do with fighting. But then something clicked in Jack's mind. He remembered the way he worked in the kitchen. How, when faced with a problem, he would improvise. He would use whatever he had available to him, knives, spices, sauces, whatever it took to create a masterpiece. He knew the power of quick thinking and creativity. And maybe, just maybe, that same creativity could help him here. The Swordmaster's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you ready to die, Earthling?" Jack didn't know how to respond. He felt like a mouse in the presence of a lion. But he couldn't back down now. The crowd was watching, waiting for the battle to begin. He had to fight. He had no other choice. The ground beneath his feet vibrated as Zorath advanced toward him, his massive sword swinging through the air with deadly precision. Jack took a step back, narrowly avoiding the sword's sharp edge. He had no training in combat, no weapons, and no real plan. All he had was his wits and his kitchen instincts. His eyes darted around the arena, searching for anything he could use to his advantage. The heat of the sun, the weight of the air, the strange metallic smell, he had to focus. He noticed something. A few small, sharp objects scattered across the ground, scraps of metal and pieces of broken technology. If he could use them like tools, like ingredients in a recipe, maybe he could survive this fight. As Zorath closed in, Jack made a quick decision. He dashed to the side, narrowly dodging another swing of the sword. He grabbed a piece of metal from the ground and held it in his hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't much, but maybe he could use it to defend himself, at least for now. "Is this all you've got?" Zorath mopped. He took another step forward, his massive sword raised high. Jack's pulse quickened. He had no idea what he was doing, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He couldn't, not when the stakes were this high. This was it. The challenge had begun. The battle for his life was on, and Jack knew he had to find a way to win, even if it meant using his kitchen skills to defeat the greatest Swordmaster in the galaxy. As Zorath's sword descended, Jack raised the metal shard to block the blow, hoping against hope that his instincts would guide him. The fight had begun, and Jack was determined to survive. The first strike. The air in the arena seemed to thicken as Zorath's sword swooped toward Jack, its gleaming edge aiming straight for his head. Jack's heart raced as he instinctively raised the metal shard he'd grabbed from the ground, hoping it would be enough to stop the oncoming blow. The collision of metal against metal rang out across the arena. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through Jack's arms, almost making him lose his grip on the shard. It wasn't much, a small piece of jagged metal, certainly nothing compared to the monstrous weapon Zorath wielded. But it was the best Jack had, and it might just be enough. Zorath's sword stopped inches from Jack's face, held back by the shard, but the alien warrior's grin only widened. "You have spirit, Earthling," Zorath growled, his voice filled with mockery. "But you will fall just like all the others." Jack didn't have time to respond. Zorath's strength was overwhelming. The alien warrior pushed forward, forcing Jack back with each strike. His feet slid against the metal floor of the arena as he struggled to maintain his footing. Jack's body screamed at him to give up, but his mind wouldn't allow it. He couldn't lose. Not now. Not when he had come so far. His eyes flicked to the surroundings, scanning for anything that could help him. The arena was bare, a large, circular space with no obvious cover. There were scraps of broken technology littering the ground, but none of them looked useful for defense. Jack's only advantage was his quick thinking. Zorath swung again, this time at Jack's side. With no choice, Jack ducked, rolling to the ground just in time to avoid the strike. He quickly got back on his feet, his breathing heavy, sweat dripping down his face. He was already exhausted, but he couldn't stop now. The crowd of alien spectators roared in excitement, their alien voices echoing in the vast arena. "Is that all you've got?" Zorath taunted, his voice low and cruel. "You are weak. You cannot defeat me." Jack's eyes narrowed. He knew that Zorath was toying with him, enjoying the power he held over the Earthling. It made sense. This was a fight for sport to the Swordmaster. But Jack wasn't going to let that stop him. Another strike came, this time from above, and Jack was forced to leap back, narrowly avoiding the sword's deadly arc. His foot caught on a loose piece of metal, and he stumbled, falling to one knee. Zorath stepped forward, ready to strike the final blow. But something in Jack's mind clicked. In the chaos of the battle, he recalled the feeling of being in a busy kitchen, surrounded by the clattering of pots and pans, the rhythm of his hands moving with precision, crafting each dish. It was all about timing, focus, and making the most of what was available. This fight, though different from his kitchen, required the same approach. He could make it work. He could turn the tide. Without thinking, Jack grabbed another piece of metal from the ground, this time a sharp, jagged shard. He knew it wasn't a sword, but maybe he could use it like one, if he was quick enough. Zorath, seeing Jack's hesitation, let out a harsh laugh. "You think you can fight with that?" he scoffed. The alien warrior raised his massive sword again, preparing for another deadly swing. But this time, Jack was ready. With a burst of energy, he leaped forward, closing the gap between him and Zorath. The Swordmaster's strike came down fast, but Jack twisted his body, dodging just enough to avoid the blow. He thrust the jagged metal shard in his hand toward Zorath's exposed side. The sharp edge scraped against the alien's armor with a loud, grating sound, leaving a long scratch across it. It wasn't a deep wound, but it was something. Zorath faltered for just a moment, a look of surprise flashing across his face. The crowd's excitement surged, their voices rising in a mix of surprise and disbelief. Jack had made contact. He had wounded the great Swordmaster. Zorath snarled, stepping back, his pride clearly stung. "You are clever, Earthling," he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "But that will not save you." Jack stood tall, breathing hard, his body screaming in pain. He could feel the heat of the arena, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But in that moment, he also felt something else, a spark of hope. He had done it. He had landed a blow. The battle was far from over, but Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Zorath defeat him without a fight. The odds were stacked against him, but if he could keep thinking like a chef, if he could keep using his instincts and creativity, he just might have a chance. As Zorath prepared for his next attack, Jack steadied his breathing and tightened his grip on the makeshift weapon. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. The turning point. The battle was escalating. Zorath's strikes came faster now, each one cutting through the air with deadly precision. Jack could feel the weight of the Swordmaster's power behind every swing. The alien's strength was overwhelming, but Jack wasn't backing down. He had already come this far, and he couldn't afford to stop now. With every move Zorath made, Jack had to think faster, react quicker. His muscles burned from the effort, his body exhausted, but he forced himself to keep moving. He dodged and ducked, using the jagged shard in his hand like a dance partner, keeping just enough distance to stay alive. He had learned something from the kitchen. The secret wasn't just to react, but to predict. Predict his opponent's next move, just as he predicted the way the ingredients would come together in a dish. Zorath's eyes narrowed in frustration. The human wasn't an easy target. For the first time, Jack had gotten under the alien's skin. That's when Jack saw it, a slate opening. Zorath's foot moved just the wrong way, and for a fraction of a second, the alien warrior was off balance. Jack knew this was the moment. He acted without thinking, his instincts taking over. He lunged forward, aiming the jagged metal shard at Zorath's unguarded side. The alien tried to turn, but Jack was too fast. The makeshift weapon struck true, sinking deep into the soft joint of Zorath's armor. The crowd fell silent. The arena seemed to hold its breath. Zorath staggered back, his sword faltering in his hand. The alien warrior growled in anger, clutching at the wound, blood dripping from his armor. The damage wasn't severe, but it was enough to shake his confidence. This wasn't supposed to happen. No human should have been able to land a blow on him. Jack stood there, panting, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the alien was shaken, but he also knew that this wasn't the end. Zorath wasn't the type to give up easily. In fact, Jack had just made the warrior more dangerous. He could see it in the alien's eyes. Zorath was about to go all out. "You're stronger than I expected," Zorath growled, wiping the blood from his side. But that will not be enough. The alien warrior's posture shifted, the stance of someone ready to unleash everything they had. Jack's heart raced as he braced himself for the next wave of attacks. But he had something else on his side now, his mind. He wasn't just a chef anymore. He was a fighter, and in that moment, he remembered one more thing from his time in the kitchen. Pressure makes diamonds. The thought gave him the clarity he needed. This fight wasn't about physical strength alone. He had something the alien didn't, ingenuity. And that's when Jack saw it, the kitchen knives. The tools he had once used to prepare meals were now weapons of survival. The moment Zorath lunged forward again, Jack was ready. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the sword. Zorath's sword slammed into the floor with a resounding crash, creating a small crater where it hit. But that moment was enough for Jack. He grabbed another piece of metal from the ground, a long sharp shard this time, and held it like a blade. He wasn't going to fight Zorath's power with strength. He was going to outsmart him. As Zorath lifted his sword for another strike, Jack tossed the shard in the air, making Zorath think it was an attack. The alien warrior's eyes followed the movement, his reflexes kicking in. In that split second of distraction, Jack moved quickly, circling behind Zorath. He used the remaining shard to slash at the alien's exposed back. This time, the hit was deeper. Zorath's roar of pain echoed through the arena as he turned, blood splattering from the fresh wound. The crowd gasped, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. They had never seen anything like this before. A human, a mere chef, was holding his own against the greatest alien warrior they had ever seen. Zorath was now enraged. He swung wildly, his sword sweeping through the air in a frenzy. But Jack was no longer fighting just to survive. He was fighting to win. He dodged and weaved, using his agility to stay out of the alien's reach. Zorath's rage made him sloppy, his movements less controlled. Jack could see the end of this battle was near. Zorath was becoming desperate. It was only a matter of time before the alien made a mistake, and Jack would be ready. As the Swordmaster prepared for another swing, Jack's mind raced. He needed one last move, one final strike. With the alien's fury clouding his judgment, Jack spotted an opening. Zorath had overextended. The alien's blade was too far from his body, leaving his chest unprotected. Jack saw it all in slow motion. He took a deep breath, focused, and with a surge of adrenaline, he moved in. He struck. The final move. The arena was alive with tension. The crowd had fallen into a hushed silence, their eyes fixed on the battle unfolding before them. The clash between Jack, a simple chef, and Zorath, the mighty alien Swordmaster, had taken an unexpected turn. Zorath's rage was now palpable. Every swing of his sword filled the air with power and fury. But Jack had learned something critical. Anger clouded judgment. Zorath, with his pride wounded and his fury unchecked, had become reckless. He swung his sword with savage force, aiming to end the fight in one decisive blow. But Jack had already anticipated this. It was the moment he had been waiting for. As Zorath brought his blade down with terrifying speed, Jack dropped to the ground, his body moving with the precision of a predator. The alien sword cleaved through the air where Jack had just been, but Jack was no longer in its path. He had shifted out of the way, using his lower center of gravity to avoid the lethal strike. In that split second of vulnerability, Jack seized the opportunity. He kicked the ground, launching himself toward Zorath. The alien warrior was off balance now, his sword embedded in the floor from the force of his swing. Jack didn't waste a moment. With the agility of a trained athlete, he grabbed a jagged shard of metal from the ground, a piece of debris from the wreckage, and charged toward Zorath's exposed chest. Zorath's eyes widened in horror. He tried to step back, but it was too late. Jack was already in range, his muscles working with instinctive precision. The metal shard stabbed deep into Zorath's chest, right between the seams of his armor. Zorath gasped, his body shuddering with shock. The alien's eyes locked onto Jack's, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. There in the heart of the arena, the great warrior stood, wounded, defeated by a mere human, by a chef who had no business being here in the first place. The crowd erupted in disbelief. A loud cheer swept through the stands, echoing off the walls of the arena. They couldn't believe it. Jack had done it. He had defeated Zorath, the unbeatable alien Swordmaster. Zorath staggered back, clutching his chest, trying to maintain his composure. The blood from the wound stained his armor, but he still refused to fall. He glared at Jack, hatred burning in his eyes. You, Zorath's voice was ragged, his words laced with contempt. You should not have won. This is impossible. But Jack stood his ground. He was panting, his energy almost drained from the long battle, but his eyes were sharp. He had faced death and emerged victorious, not through brute strength, but through wit, speed, and resilience. He had outsmarted the alien warrior, and it was a lesson Zorath would never forget. Jack's voice rang out in the silence, cutting through the tension in the arena. Sometimes it's not about strength. It's about knowing your enemy, and knowing yourself. Zorath gritted his teeth. His hand fell from his chest, and he slowly, painfully straightened. The alien Swordmaster had been brought to his knees, but Jack could see the fire still burning in his opponent's eyes. I have underestimated you, human, Zorath muttered. But this is not over. We will meet again. And with that, Zorath staggered back, his retreat not as a defeat, but as a vow of vengeance. He would not forget this battle. He would not forget the chef who had beaten him. Jack watched him leave, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. The crowd roared, chanting Jack's name, but Jack remained focused. He had won, yes, but this was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The arena, once full of dread and anticipation, now felt like a place of victory. Jack had proven that sometimes, even the most unlikely hero could make the impossible possible. He had done it. Against all odds, Jack had defeated the alien Swordmaster. But in the back of his mind, Jack knew something else. This was not the end. Zorath might be gone, but there would be others. More warriors, more challenges, and Jack was ready for them. The crowd's cheers grew louder, but Jack's thoughts turned inward. He had won this fight, but there was still so much more to prove. As he stood there in the center of the arena, a champion, Jack couldn't help but wonder what awaited him next. One thing was certain, this was only the beginning. The unexpected ally. The arena slowly quieted as the echoes of Jack's victory faded. The crowd, once filled with the roars of disbelief and exhilaration, began to settle into a hushed murmuring. Jack stood at the center, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his body sore and battered from the fight. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a fire in his eyes, a fire that burned brighter now than ever before. Jack knew that his victory over Zorath had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The legend of the fierce alien Swordmaster, who had been defeated by a mere human chef, would likely become a story told for generations. But this victory, as sweet as it was, only raised more questions. As the crowd parted, a figure approached Jack from the shadows of the arena. At first, Jack didn't recognize the person, but the presence was unmistakable. The figure was tall, with a commanding air about them. They wore a dark cloak, and their face was hidden in the shadows. Impressive, a voice said, low and smooth, but filled with authority. I must say, I didn't expect a chef to be capable of such skill. Jack tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the hilt of a knife tucked into his belt. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Who was this? An ally? An enemy? Or perhaps someone else entirely? The figure stepped into the light, revealing a woman. She wasn't just any woman, though she was wearing the uniform of the Galactic Elite, the highest-ranking military force in the universe. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Galactic Elite? Jack asked cautiously. What are you doing here? The woman's lips curled into a slight smile, but her expression remained unreadable. She didn't immediately answer Jack's question. Instead, she took a few steps forward and examined the wound on his side, the one Zorath had inflicted earlier. She frowned, noticing how Jack winced when she touched it. "You're hurt," she said, her voice cold but not unkind. "I'll live," Jack replied, not wanting to reveal too much. He had no idea who this woman was or what her intentions were. But there was one thing he did know. She wasn't here to congratulate him. "I saw your fight," the woman continued, her eyes sharp. "You're more than just a chef, Jack. You're something else entirely. Something rare." Jack was taken aback. "How do you know my name?" The woman's eyes softened for the first time. "In this arena, word travels fast. But it's not just your name I know. It's your potential." Jack raised an eyebrow, confused. "My potential?" "Listen," the woman said, her voice suddenly serious. "I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here to make you an offer." An offer? Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just some random encounter. She had come here with a purpose, and that purpose had something to do with him. But what could a Galactic Elite officer possibly want with a human chef? "What kind of offer?" Jack asked, his voice steady but cautious. "Your skills are unique," she said. "You've shown that you can think on your feet, adapt in the most challenging of situations. The Galactic Elite needs someone like you. We're fighting a war against a ruthless alien faction, one that has been terrorizing systems across the galaxy. And right now, we're losing." Jack blinked in surprise. A war? The Galactic Elite was involved in a war. But why would they want him, a mere human with no military training, to join their ranks? "I'm a chef," Jack replied, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I cook food. I don't fight wars." The woman shook her head slowly, as if she had anticipated his response. "It's not about what you were. It's about what you can become. You've already proven yourself in battle. You've shown the galaxy that humans are capable of more than anyone expected. We need that kind of spirit. We need someone who can think outside the box, someone who can turn the tide of a battle when all seems lost." Jack's thoughts raced. Could this really be happening? Could a simple chef, someone with no formal combat training, actually make a difference in a galactic war? His mind drifted back to the fight against Zorath. There had been something in that battle, something that had awakened in him. Maybe this wasn't as crazy as it seemed. The woman took another step forward. "Join us, Jack. You don't have to fight with a sword or a blaster. You have a different weapon. Your mind, your creativity. We've seen what you're capable of. Help us win this war, and we'll make sure you have the resources, the training, and the support you need to become even stronger." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, if anyone could truly be ready for the responsibility she was offering him. But he couldn't ignore the pull. There was something inside him, something deep, that told him this was the right choice. "I'll do it," Jack said, his voice steady. "I'll help you." The woman's expression softened into a rare, approving smile. "Good. We'll need someone like you. Prepare yourself, Jack. This is just the beginning." As the woman turned to leave, Jack felt a surge of determination. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The fate of the galaxy was on the line, and he was no longer just a chef. He was part of something much larger. And whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. After all, he had already faced an alien Swordmaster and won. What else could the galaxy throw at him? The galactic mission begins. The days following Jack's decision were a blur. A flurry of meetings, briefings, and training sessions consumed him as the woman, now introduced as Captain Area Voltec, led him into the depths of the Galactic Elite's operations. Jack's life as a chef, his days spent perfecting the art of cooking in the small kitchen of his diner, seemed like a lifetime ago. Now he was standing in the heart of a massive military command center aboard a battleship, an advanced vessel that would carry him across the galaxy. Area had given him a crash course in combat tactics and strategy. Not that Jack was particularly interested in wielding a weapon. He had never been one for violence, but something about the urgency of the situation made him set aside his doubts. This was bigger than himself. Jack quickly learned that the war the Galactic Elite was fighting was not just any war. The enemy, a merciless alien race known as the Virac, had been systematically conquering planets, tearing through systems with terrifying efficiency. No one knew much about the Virac, except for the chilling fact that they were ruthless and bent on total domination. The Virac were unlike any adversary Jack had ever imagined. Their warriors were a terrifying combination of strength and agility, capable of taking down entire squads with ease. Their technology was far superior to anything humans had, and they were relentless in their pursuit of conquest. But the Galactic Elite had one thing the Virac didn't: hope. And that's where Jack came in. His ability to think outside the box, to find solutions in impossible situations, was exactly what the Elite needed to combat the Virac. Jack's role wasn't to fight on the front lines with a weapon, but rather to act as a strategist, someone who could see opportunities where others saw dead ends. One morning, as Jack stood by the observation deck, looking out at the stars beyond, Arya approached him. She had a tablet in her hand, and her face was serious. "We've just received intel about a Virac stronghold on the planet Sarnax," she said, her voice low. "It's a critical location. If we don't take it down, the Virac will have access to a massive fleet of warships. We can't let that happen." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had been briefed about Sarnax. It was a heavily guarded fortress, nearly impenetrable. But Jack wasn't thinking about the fortress. He was thinking about how to approach it, how to outsmart the Virac. "I have an idea," he said, his voice steady. "But I'll need a team." Arya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Jack's mind raced as he formulated his plan. "We won't attack head-on. The Virac are expecting that. Instead, we need to infiltrate their defenses, disrupt their communication systems. While they're scrambling to figure out what's going on, we'll sneak in, sabotage their main reactor, and cripple their fleet." Arya's eyes narrowed. "That's a risky move. If they catch us, it's game over." Jack looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "If we don't do it, the war's over before it even starts." Arya studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Jack. We'll do it your way." Jack spent the next few days preparing. With the help of the Galactic Elite's best technicians, he coordinated an infiltration team. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. They would land near the Virac stronghold, disguised as Virac soldiers, and sneak inside. Once in, they disable the security systems, sabotage the reactor, and escape before the Virac could realize what had happened. As Jack trained with his team, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Virac had been known for their paranoia, and there was no doubt they'd have layers of security set up to detect intruders. Jack knew the mission was risky, but it was the best chance they had. Finally, the day arrived. The Galactic Elite's flagship, a massive ship called the Phoenix, hovered in orbit above Sarnax. The infiltration team was ready, their gear packed, and their disguises in place. Jack felt a strange calm wash over him. This wasn't a simple mission anymore. This was the beginning of something much larger. Aria gave him one last glance before they boarded the shuttle. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice tense. Jack smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been in tougher situations than this. We can do it." As they descended toward the surface of Sarnax, Jack's thoughts turned to the battlefield ahead. He wasn't a soldier, and he wasn't a hero. He was just a chef who had been thrust into a galaxy-shattering conflict. But he had learned one thing. It wasn't about the weapons you wielded. It was about the will to survive, the ability to think, and the courage to stand when everyone else would fall. The shuttle touched down with a quiet thud, and the hatch opened. Jack stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into the cold, rocky terrain of Sarnax. He glanced at his team, each of them steely-eyed and ready for what lay ahead. This was it, the beginning of the war, and Jack was determined to see it through. The battle for Sarnax. The air on Sarnax was thick with tension. As Jack and his team moved through the desolate landscape toward the Vurek stronghold, every step felt heavier than the last. The darkness of the planet's moonless night loomed over them like a weight pressing down on their shoulders. It was quiet, almost eerily so, but Jack knew that silence was the enemy's favorite weapon. They were being watched, even if they couldn't see the eyes on them. The team's disguises, specially made to mimic Vurek soldiers, had worked so far, allowing them to pass through several checkpoints undetected. But that was the easy part. The true challenge lay ahead, infiltrating the heart of the fortress and shutting down the reactor that powered the Vurek's fleet. Jack's mind raced as they approached the entrance to the stronghold, a massive, heavily guarded structure carved directly into the side of a jagged mountain. Lights flashed across the perimeter, casting strange shadows on the rocky ground. Vurek soldiers patrolled in tight formation, their alien eyes scanning every corner with unsettling precision. Jack swallowed hard but kept moving forward. He couldn't afford to be seen. "We're close," whispered Aria, who was by his side, her hand poised over the controls of the team's communication device. "The main reactor is in the heart of that mountain. We'll need to disable the security system before we can access it." Jack nodded, looking up at the imposing walls. The real fight starts now. They made their way deeper into the fortress, slipping past the Vurek guards. Every footstep was calculated. Jack's team had been trained for this kind of mission, but it didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. He could feel the weight of their lives on his shoulders, and the pressure was unbearable at times. But he kept it together. They had to succeed. The fate of countless planets rested on their shoulders. Once inside the fortress, they encountered the first real obstacle, a series of locked doors protected by biometric scanners. The Vurek weren't known for being lenient with intruders, and Jack knew they wouldn't get another chance if they were caught now. Aria stepped forward, pulling out a small device that she had been working on for days, a device designed to hack into Vurek's security systems. She plugged it into the nearest console and began typing quickly, her eyes flicking over the screen as lines of code flashed by. "Almost there," she muttered. The tension in the air was palpable. Jack glanced at the rest of the team, who were on high alert, watching for any signs of movement from the guards. The seconds felt like hours. Finally, the screen flashed green, and the door opened with a hiss. Jack exhaled in relief, and the team moved forward. They navigated the labyrinth of hallways, their path lit by the dim glow of alien technology. It was like nothing Jack had ever seen: smooth, sleek walls, metallic surfaces that seemed to shimmer under the faint light. They passed more guards, but each time they managed to avoid detection by staying hidden in the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the fortress, the reactor chamber. It was a massive room with a pulsating core in the center, radiating an eerie blue light. The reactor was protected by thick glass walls, and security systems buzzed and clicked around it, scanning for any unauthorized access. "Here it is," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now let's make this quick." Harriet and her team got to work, quickly setting up a series of charges that would disable the reactor's power. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as he watched the team move with precision. Everything had to go according to plan, or they wouldn't make it out alive. As they worked, a low growl echoed through the room. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. He turned, eyes wide. In the shadows at the far end of the room, a Vurek soldier stepped forward, his massive form nearly blending into the darkness. His eyes glowed with a menacing light, and the tension in the air thickened instantly. Before anyone could react, the Vurek warrior lunged toward them. His movements were lightning fast, and his massive blade glinted in the dim light. Jack barely had time to think as the soldier swung the sword, narrowly missing him. The team sprang into action. Arya and the others pulled out their weapons, but Jack had no weapon of his own. His mind raced as he dodged another strike, his heart thumping in his chest. They needed a way out, and fast. Thinking quickly, Jack scanned the room for anything that could help. His eyes landed on a large metallic canister sitting near the reactor. Without thinking twice, Jack grabbed it and threw it toward the Vurek warrior. The canister exploded on impact, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The Vurek soldier stumbled backward, momentarily disoriented. This was Jack's chance. He ran toward the soldier, his mind focused entirely on one thing: survival. He lunged at the Vurek, using his own body to knock the warrior off balance. The two crashed to the ground, and Jack, using his chef's agility, grabbed a knife that had been left on a nearby table. It wasn't much, but it was enough. With a quick, precise strike, Jack drove the knife into the Vurek's vulnerable side. The soldier let out a strangled scream and collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Jack stood over the fallen alien warrior, panting heavily. The rest of the team was still processing the chaos, but Jack knew they couldn't stay long. The Vurek would be on to them soon. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice low and steady. With the security systems temporarily disabled and the reactor sabotage complete, the team made their escape, running through the labyrinth of corridors toward their exit point. The fate of the mission still hung in the balance, but for now, Jack had proven something to himself and to the galaxy. He wasn't just a chef. He was a warrior, too. The team boarded their shuttle, the fortress behind them beginning to tremble as the reactor's power destabilized. Jack looked out the window at the chaos below. They had done it, but the war was far from over.